We're going to be in a couple different places. So one of the main texts I want to get to eventually is Psalm 19. You can also put your finger in Romans 12 if you want to. But if you really want to, you can just write down all the references and go to them later. This is, of course, part number 3 in our series through studying the topic of apologetics, learning how to defend our faith and why. Actually, we could say the more biblical sort of definition of that is giving a reason for the hope that is in us. So that's what we're going into. We're diving in. Last time together, we spent our time talking about pop quiz. What did we talk about? Apologetics. I'll give you a B for that. What did we talk about? Yes, Jen. There we go. We talked about what's the deal with worldviews. And we looked at what a worldview is. We looked, I think I have slides for this. Yeah, we talked about worldviews. We talked about how the fact is that everyone has one. Every person that you meet has a worldview, whether they know it or not. There's some sort of, we called it sort of a framing device by which they understand reality. There's a lens by which they're understanding all of these things that are happening, how they make sense of it. No one looks at the world in a vacuum. No one looks at the world sort of devoid of a lens or a filter. We all have a worldview that is informing what we believe, and that is also informing what we do. It's forming our actions. And depending on what worldviews we have, that's how it filters down. It impacts not just our beliefs, but our values and our behavior. And the big question is whether our worldview is going to be shaped by the Word of God or whether it's going to be shaped by something else. Are you being shaped by God's truth or are you being shaped by something else? And this is why Paul insists, as we saw in Romans chapter 12, that not just the church at Rome, but us, all churches, that we not be conformed to the things of this world, but we are transformed by the renewal of our minds. We talked about that verse quite a lot, explaining the ways in which it's not just a discipleship verse, it's an apologetics verse in a lot of ways, how we are not to be conformed to the world's lenses, the world's worldviews, but to the worldview that is ingrained in us by the Word and the Spirit. We spent some time also comparing some of the dominant worldviews from naturalism to pantheism to Marxism to all these other different ones that we went through. They are the dominant ones of our day. And we also said that each one of these worldviews is sort of a story. It's a story of the world. That's a really helpful way to understand it. And they're trying to tell a story for the way things are. Not only tell us the problem, but give a solution. And one of the things that we saw throughout all of those other stories or all of those other worldviews, they all eventually fall flat. The Christian worldview and the claim of Christian apologetics is that the Christian story, the Christian worldview, is the one that has the most compelling solution to the problem that we all know and feel. The problem is us, and the solution is Christ. And this is why the Christian story is so endlessly compelling, why it can resonate with us here in America, why it can resonate with millions of people around the world, why it can resonate with a 5-year-old and a 50-year-old. It's a universally, endlessly compelling story. And that's kind of what we're defending. That's kind of what we are staking our claim on, this worldview, which is also a story. Tonight, though, we're entering part 3. We want to ask this question, but also answer it in a number of different ways. Does God really exist? Of course, for many of us here, we would, hopefully, all of us here, we would say that that's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's worth considering and probing this question because you're going to get it a lot. You're going to get it in people that you run into. You're going to get it with people that perhaps you work with or perhaps that you know. But I think any worldview, whether all the ones that we looked at last time, pantheism, Marxism, naturalism, so on and so forth, they all have to account for this question. Does God really exist? How does the being of God fit into that story? In many ways, I would say that this is the question of questions. It's more than the $64,000 question, this is the $64 million question. It's the question that is most pertinent. It's the one that we can't escape. It's been a question that has plagued students and scholars just as much as it's plagued farmers and philosophers. It's a question that never seems to go away. And it only gets more pressing The longer time turns on, the longer we move through this life, the longer time marches on, this question becomes so pressing because we feel it. There's a reason why folks on their deathbed ask for a chaplain, because they feel in that moment eternity encroaching upon them. And suddenly then, that's when all of these things sort of come rushing to their minds and their hearts. Unfortunately, for a large portion of society, this question of God's existence doesn't really seem that urgent. You can just look out and you can notice that this question of does God really exist doesn't seem to be pressing on their minds, at least right now. And I don't think this is because most folks that are around us that don't attend church or that don't believe in the scriptures, that don't trust in Jesus, I don't think it's because that they have meticulously or thoughtfully reasoned their way to their position. I don't think we're around a lot of thoughtful atheists. And that's no disparagement. I just think that generally speaking, that's not the case. I think actually they've just kind of learned to function without ever stopping to consider the question. I think there's an unfortunate number of people, I'm going to try and explain this. I think there's an unfortunate number of people that think about the question of God's existence sort of like this scene from Jurassic Park. And maybe you're like, what in the world does that have to do with it? But remember this scene in Jurassic Park? And the T-Rex obviously comes to the fence, and the T-Rex is chasing after the people. But remember, what does he say? Remember what he says? If you don't move, he can't see you. And we have no idea if that's true. Like, I don't know how archaeologists are like, yeah, the T-Rex couldn't see you if you weren't moving. Who knows if that was true? But at least in the movie, that's how it is. If you don't move, the T-Rex can't see you. He sees movement, apparently, according to Steven Spielberg. And I think, and maybe that's a really silly example, but I think that's sort of the way that some people operate. That if we just never ask the question, then we don't have to deal with it. It's sort of like this T-Rex. If we just stop moving and we don't consider the scenario, does God really exist, then it's no big deal. I can just carry on with my life. And you have people operating in that way. I think by and large, that's the way folks operate. That if they don't stop and think about God's existence, and if he does exist, what that means for them, then they don't have to deal with it. They don't have to worry about it. And I think it's because either they don't care, or because life's busyness, just all of that busyness, it gets in the way, the obligations of life. And I think this is why we could say it's not so much thoughtful, I had slides for that. It's not so much thoughtful atheism as much as it is practical atheism. It's sort of like atheism out of convenience. It's sort of a level of indifference to God, which is unfortunate. But I think probing this question, does God exist, I think could help us in conversations with those who don't believe in God at all. But I think the point is that no matter how far down the road someone kicks that can, kicks the can of the question of does God exist, however far we try to postpone that, it never goes away. Everyone has to face this question eventually. Why? Because everyone has to face death. That's what we're going back to with people on their deathbed. Go with me really quick to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I told you Psalm 19. I should have probably told you Ecclesiastes. We went through, it's been a while, but we went through Ecclesiastes in one of my first few years here. And I remember going through it and really enjoying that study. It might be time to break that out again. But Ecclesiastes 9 has this really amazing statement. As the preacher, probably Solomon, notice what he says here, which I think is quite profound. Ecclesiastes 9, look at verse 2. He says, it is the same for all. Since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and to the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. The dead, death, that's the event he's talking about. The same event that happens to everyone, no matter their station in life, no matter their progress in life, no matter how successful or unsuccessful they are, no matter how much they've ascended in whatever sphere of life God has planted them in, no matter how low or high they are on the social ladder, it doesn't really matter. The same event happens to them all. Again, this question of God's existence is one that we can't shake. In other words, we could put it this way. While you might be able to live as if God doesn't exist, you can't really die that way. Eventually, all of that goes away. All of that facade of pretending that God doesn't exist goes away when we close our eyes and for the final time. And by choosing never to consider that question of God's existence and all of the ramifications that go along with that's making a choice. It's making a gamble with your very eternity. That's what folks are doing. They're gambling with their very eternity. This kind of brings me to something we could call Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal, you might have heard, I've mentioned him in sermons before. He's a French mathematician from, I think, the 1600s. But he was an Orthodox Christian in different sort of sphere of Christianity. But if you read his thoughts called Pensées, it's like this series of thoughts. Imagine someone's Twitter account and just put it in a book. It's sort of like that because it's sort of like little notes that he would scribble, and they found it all, I think, after he was dead. And they put it together in a book called Pascal's Thoughts. And he has a bunch of really just gems within all of those writings that he has. But he has one that's commonly referred to as Pascal's wager. And it's not, we couldn't say it's an airtight sort of argument for God and God's existence, but it's one that I think that is worth chewing on. And he says this is the pertinent passage at least. He says, let us weigh the gain and the loss in wagering that God is. So let us sort of examine the situation, whether what we're going to gain if God exists or what we're going to lose if God doesn't exist. Let us estimate these two chances. If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager then, without hesitation, that he exists. Here is here, an infinity of an infinitely happy life to gain, and chance of gain against finite number of chances of loss, and what you stake is infinite. So basically, Pascal is arguing for this, that if God exists, that if you choose to gamble that he doesn't, then you're losing infinitely, and you're gaining everything. And if he doesn't exist, then you've gambled that he does, then you haven't really lost anything. So his whole argument here, which is, of course, not super airtight, but I think it's worth pondering and chewing on, is the fact that if God exists, and Pascal would say that he does, then even at the most basic of basic levels, the odds say, if you're a wagering person, which I'm not, but the odds say it's better to bet on the fact that God exists than he doesn't, because of just what you're going to gain if he does exist. And again, there's a lot that we could unpack there, and we don't have time to unpack all of the things that are in that. But with something as categorical as eternity on the line, the bigger gamble is not that we believe in an all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing, everywhere present God. That's not a bigger gamble. The bigger gamble is indifference, of not surrendering, of not putting our faith and trust, and not obeying. That's the bigger gamble. That's, in a nutshell, what Pascal is arguing for. And I think it's worth chewing on that. The goals for tonight are a couple. The goal tonight is I want to show that belief in God is intellectually responsible, that is also existentially honest, and it's thoroughly coherent. It basically, faith is the only sensible option. Faith is the sensible option among the rest. And I want to frame that statement that way on purpose, because so often you're going to run into folks, and maybe you've run into this online or social media, or maybe people you've run into in person. They're going to try to drive a wedge between faith and science. This is often what occurs in spheres of higher learning or advanced thought or what have you. They want to drive this idea that faith is juxtaposed against reason and logic and science and evidence. And in some senses, we could say that that's true. We could say that. It's true. The people of Israel didn't have a lot of evidence to trust in a victory they couldn't see at the Red Sea. We could say that. That's true. They didn't. They didn't have a lot of evidence. Actually, in fact, it looked like they were going to lose. But even still, Moses' invitation to faith wasn't something, it wasn't a summons to something that's illogical. That's sort of the point that we're making. Faith, what we would always talk about and what we should always keep in our mind's eye, faith is not this irrational or illogical plunge into the darkness. Faith is not against reason or against logic. Actually, faith, we could say, is supra-rational or supra-logical. Supra is a prefix in the Latin that means above or beyond. So we could say that faith is beyond or above reason or logic that's found under the sun. That's what faith is. So it's not against reason or logic, it's against human reason or logic. The way that we perceive, the way that we try to figure out the way the world works. That's sort of the Christian gospel. And Christian apologetics is making an argument for this, that we believe our religion, our faith isn't sort of religious nonsense. It's not just a bunch of fairy tales and hokey stories that we believe in. That's not what people like to sort of categorize Christians as those who believe in that. Old wives' tales and all that stuff. Actually, the Christian faith is a Christian message that's steeped, we could say, in the logic of God, whose ways aren't our ways and whose thoughts aren't our thoughts, Isaiah 55:8. So therefore, I think it's grossly misleading to divide faith and science, especially because there's a lot of scientific material that's found in Scripture. But also, there's this reality that everyone lives by faith. Or we could say, I should back up. The reality is, everyone lives by faith. And the only real question is what kind of faith and where that faith is placed. Science is this extraordinarily powerful endeavor that strives to understand the mechanics of the world, that strives to sort of explain the way the world works. And it's often pitted against faith. I had this picture in there. I don't know if you're going to get it, but I remember this scene from Nacho Libre where he says, "I only believe in science." I always think of that scene when I'm talking about this subject. Anyways, that's a nerdy joke because I like that movie. Faith isn't illogical. Faith isn't against logic. Faith is supralogical. This is what we're saying. This is the argument that we're making. And from Newton to Kepler to Galileo to Boyle, there have been several celebrated, revered, renowned scientists who are also devoutly Christian, and it informed the way that they conducted science. And so the problem isn't with faith or science, but with utilizing science to answer the wrong questions. Oops, I forgot. See, I need to get better at doing PowerPoints. Okay. So another way we could word this is that science can give you the how or the what of things, but it can't give you the why. And that's sort of one of the things that we understand faith to do. Faith gives us this existential why to the way things are, why God has given us this thing called life, why he has put us in this place where we are. All of that is part of faith. So let's start with some basics that we can sort of understand what we're talking about here. We could say on the most basic thing, something exists. Material matter exists. There is a universe that is comprised of matter and energy and time and space, and we are a part of it. We're included in it. But this begs the question: why is there something and not nothing? Why does all this exist at all? And as odd or as off-putting as that question might sound, it is one that every worldview, every story that we talked about last time, they have to account for this. They have to account for why this all exists. Why does this all exist in the first place? And there are really only two possibilities. There's only two real answers that you could give to this. Either one, the universe is self-existent, or the universe is caused. Really, there's only two ways that we can understand this problem, so to speak, or how we can account for this, this idea of reality existing. Either the universe is self-existent or the universe is cause. Either all of life, everything that we see around us, the plants and the trees and the way in which life cycles work, the way in which pollination happens, and it's a part of the insect world, and all of the things that go together to make that possible so that we have oxygen to breathe, all of those things, all of the amazing things that God has, or we could, that are in our world. Either you have to say that that just exists for no other reason simply than it exists, or the universe and everything in it, all of those things, was put there, was caused, was brought into being by something else. Those are the two options. And we could further say that if the universe was caused, then it was caused by something outside of time and matter and space. Since that cause, or causer, brought all of those things into existence. And maybe we're getting too heady, but if the universe was caused, it was brought about by something or someone, we have to say that the cause has to be powerful enough and creative enough and wise enough to bring all that is existing into being. Or in other words, the causer can't be bound by the restraints of that which is caused. Otherwise, then we have to explain where the causer comes from. And that's why, and we're going to get there, that's why the most basic verse in the Christian faith is this: in the beginning, God. Right there, we've answered that question. Who the causer of all that exists is. It's God, and He's always existed. He's the eternal one. We don't have to explain where God came from, because God's always been. God always was. Terrible English, very good theology. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He is the universe's causer. He caused it to come into being. There's a reason why this is the first verse in the Scriptures, because it's the most basic and fundamental understanding to what we see all around us. Who caused the universe to come into being? We could also go to Exodus 3:14, the God who said to Moses, I am who I am. The eternal one, Yahweh. Or the verse that I had you turn to, Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. He's the one who brought it about. He's the one who made it exist. The good point is, and there's several apologists that'll make this point, that life never comes from non-life. Before anything was, God was, and He has always been and always will be the life giver. And rejecting this confession or this conviction that there is a cause and this causer is in fact God, rejecting that doesn't eliminate the need for faith. Actually, what we're going to see and what we're going to find out is that actually just kind of relocates faith to some other category, to some other bin of truth that we're trying to trust in. You see, you can assert that everything exists because impersonal forces or a series of impersonal forces caused it for reasons unknown. This thing smashed into that thing and there was this cosmic explosion or blah, blah, blah. Or you can assert that a personal, intelligent being stands behind everything that exists. And in that sort of understanding of how the universe came to be, one isn't necessarily more scientific than the other. It's just that either you're putting your faith in something or you're putting it in someone. Either way, you're putting your faith somewhere. And so a Christian apologetics says, at its core, at its root, Christian apologetics is saying that along with that, the fact that the universe has a cause, and it also has a causer, and that causer is none other than God. So that means life has a meaning because it comes from the causer. Christian apologetics also says a couple of other things, namely that the universe is divinely ordered and finely tuned and is information rich. It doesn't just exist because it exists. No, it was put there on purpose. It was made by someone. And you could go to the old clock sort of explanation if you want to. Or there's a couple other ways we could explain this. Scientists, folks, way smarter than me, way more degrees than me, way more letters after their name. They say that our universe is governed by a series of constants, things that have to be, and otherwise we couldn't be, we couldn't exist. They call these constants. There's roughly around 30 of them in all that have to be so finely tuned, or else life is impossible. Each constant that they say that the universe is rooted in is so finely tuned that the smallest tweaks, one way or the other, would make life impossible. So a good example of this is gravity. Gravity is minutely balanced, so much so that if we were stronger, and I don't even understand the math on this because I'm not a math person. Maybe some of you are math people, but we could say it this way. Gravity is so finely tuned that if it were stronger by even a factor of 1 in 10 to the 40th, even just that small of a factor, then black holes would dominate the cosmos. Everything would be pulled in onto itself, and everything would collapse in on itself. Which is to say, we live on a razor's edge. Because gravity is so finely balanced. And it's finely balanced against the electromagnetic force of the universe. And the odds, and this is even more crazy, the odds that the electromagnetic force of the created order is so perfectly balanced with the gravitational pull to allow for life, it's magnetically impossible. The chances that both of these would line up in the way that they are is not by random chance. If it was by random chance, it would be 1 in 10 to the 229th power. That's 10 with 229 zeros after it. That's the chances, the odds that all of these things are lining up so perfectly, so minutely, so hairline balancing that life exists. And I don't know about you, but I think it takes more faith to believe that all of that just happened, instead of God speaking it into existence. I think it takes more faith to believe that all of this math just happened to work out in this blind random chance that two things collided, or that this and that, and all of these things emerged out of one another. Consider, we could go to the microscopic level. All of us, of course, are made up of DNA. DNA has often been called sort of the building blocks of life, but it isn't just life's Lego blocks. Inside DNA is all kinds of information. It's like a code, like a computer code. When you open this computer, all of what you're seeing right here is not really this image. It's a bunch of ones and zeros in a sequence that makes even no sense to me, talking about binary, and it's all code. It's coded into this. You could think of DNA in the same sort of way, that it's code for all of life. And a single cell of DNA contains enough information to fill up 8,000 books. A single cell of it. You could travel to the sun and back 200 times with all of that information, and the odds of this just happening are basically nil. Basically, yeah. Time and chance can never just produce coherence, let alone consciousness. And whenever someone has this position that life and reality, everything that we see, everything that exists, everything that we are experiencing just came to be over the course of ages, even billions of ages, the simple math says that there's no world in which that makes sense, especially when you consider one of the most fundamental laws of our universe, which is the second law of thermodynamics, which says what? Anyone know? Eric, go ahead.
The law of entropy.
The law of entropy. The things that everything is not actually getting younger, things are actually dying. The law of entropy says that actually things are going towards disorder. Disorder increases over time. Decay happens over time, which means things naturally move from order to chaos, not the other way around. Things are breaking down. So just saying that things are the way they are, and to explain that, we could just add a billion years, that actually doesn't make the argument better. It makes it worse. Because that means things have had another billion years to break down. They've had another billion years to decay, for disorder to take place. And order, just as life never comes from non-life, order never comes from disorder. It can't come from chaos. So from the cosmos to stars to the universe to things out in deep space to cathedrals, you could go into any cathedral in Europe, let's say, to even just examining the human eyeball. Examining something, just think about something that's so minutely, intricately designed, it naturally infers a designer. No one would look at that and just be like, oh yeah, this just happened. People just threw a bunch of logs together and look, it's St. Peter's. No one would ever come to that conclusion. And while some might suggest that intelligent design is sort of a weak argument for the existence of God, actually I don't think it is. I think it's just one of the most basic. I think it's the simplest answer to a very basic question. Considering the evidence, does blind chance or intelligent design make more sense? Just, we could ask that basic question. And the simplest answer is intelligent design makes more sense. And that's sort of the philosopher Occam. He's famous for that Occam's razor, which says that the simplest solution is usually the right one. Again, not the most infallible argument, but at least we can talk about that very logically. That the simplest solution is usually the right one. If you look at the world, it just makes more sense that there is a designer to it. And we could press this matter even further by turning from the universe. We could turn to ourselves. Every civilization that's ever existed from the beginning of time has always affirmed some sense of right and wrong. There's been law, there's been order, there's been justice that has defined certain societies. And we wouldn't say, and there's certain laws that we could say that have always been true, no matter what civilization that you live in. We wouldn't say, for instance, this is kind of drastic, but we wouldn't say that genocide is wrong because we say it's wrong, because Western society says it's wrong. No, there's a sense in which we understand that that's just wrong. No matter who you are or where you live, the atrocious act of genocide against another race of human beings or against another nationality of human beings just is wrong. And we sense that within our makeup. We sense that within our material lives. And that statement, though, only makes sense if morality is an objective reality. And that's sort of the point. Morality is objective. It exists outside of human opinions about it. Human opinions often change or develop or they morph over time. They change with the times. You can just look at American history. That's not an argument for any certain thing. Just look at American history and the ways in which morality has changed. If instead moral values are just that, they're a construct of society and what society values, then there is nothing solid to ground them. The result is chaos. The result is just unbridled anarchy. Injustice is just a matter of your opinion versus mine. So you see, Christian apologetics says that moral values have been written on our hearts by the Creator who made us in our image. The fact that there is a law that we would appeal to when we see injustice happen or evil happen, when we see that being perpetrated, that implies that there was a lawgiver that was way above Washington or any other sort of law governing agency in the world. Or someone higher than that. Christian apologetics says it's no accident. It was put there by God. Genesis 1, 26 and 27, when God says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let him have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God is imprinting his morality, his right and wrong onto the hearts of human beings. Explaining this away or dismissing the existence of God means losing the value of life. You see, life has meaning and value and significance precisely because the Creator has deemed it so. I love this verse from Ecclesiastes as well. Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This is sort of at the conclusion of that series of verses in Ecclesiastes 3 where Solomon or the preacher is saying there's a time for this and a time for that. And at the end he says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. And also, notice that phrase, He has put eternity into man's heart. Yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. He has put eternity into the heart of man. It's kind of reminiscent of this quote from C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity. He says, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." By the way, there's another really good Blaise Pascal quote on this very same train of thought, who talks about this idea that because we're searching in this world for something to fill the fact that our souls have had this eternal void in them, is the fact that is the reason why nothing in this life can fill that void is because it was made for eternity. We were made for another world, as C.S. Lewis would say it. See, Christian apologetics says that the Christian faith is what offers the most coherent answer to everything that we see, to life itself. And that's sort of the point that we're making, is that this faith that we believe in isn't just this hokey ancient religion. Actually, it's a system of faith in which we would say, here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's why it all makes sense. Colossians, I'm going to read a couple of verses. I forgot to put these on here, but Colossians chapter number 1, verse 16, what does Paul say? He says this, "For by him," meaning Christ, "all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he's before all things, and in him all things hold together." The balance of the universe is hung together by the fact that Christ is still ruling and reigning. And that's sort of the point. That's sort of the beautiful point of Christian apologetics is, again, we would say that Christian apologetics is clearing the way for evangelism, is clearing all the weeds, it's clearing out all the brush. Because the Christian message doesn't ultimately rest, it doesn't ultimately hang on a mathematical equation. We can't just give a formula to someone and then, suddenly the light bulbs go off. The Christian faith hangs on a person. Even better than an equation or formula, it hangs on a person. It hangs on the God who makes himself known in creation and by entering into creation himself. That verse, Psalm 19, that I had you turn to, I'll read a couple verses, then we'll close. If I can turn there myself. Psalm 19, verse 1, we read it earlier. What does the psalmist say? "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." It's reminiscent of what Paul says in Romans chapter number 1. These are really familiar verses. Romans 1 verse 19 says this, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." He's echoing what the psalmist says. Everything that you see, it reverberates with the fact that there is a creator. He's put his fingerprints everywhere. And most beautiful of all, what the Christian faith hangs on is that very God has come down and dwelt among us, as it says in John's Gospel, chapter number 1, these amazing words. And the Word, I'm going to read this verse. John 1 verse 1. It's sort of like Genesis 1:1. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He, the Word, was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." Awesome, amazing truth. And then the truth turns. Verse 14, "And the Word became flesh." That's the Christian story. That's the heart of the Christian message. Is that we say all of this exists, and guess what? That God who caused this universe to come into existence, that put everything and hung it in a balance, that God took on flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. As he says in verse 18, "No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He, the Word of God, a.k.a. Christ, he has made him known." That's the heart of the Christian message. You see, Apologetics is going to clear away all these obstacles. We can help people understand it doesn't make sense. The math doesn't math. To try and say that all of this just exists. Evangelism comes in, the gospel comes in and invites people to trust that this God came down and took on flesh for them. See, the ultimate answer of all of this conversation between apologetics and evangelism, faith and science and all these things is the difference between saying God exists and then saying, come now and know the God exists, the God who exists, and be known by him. That's the ultimate end that we want to drive people to in conversations about the existence of God or worldviews or what have you. You're driving them to that confession that this God who made everything, he has come to know you and he wants to be known by you. What an amazing invitation that we have. This is an amazing series of thoughts that we can explore and unpack and chew. This idea of God creating everything, causing everything. And I pray that it speaks to you and settles your souls. And may we go out and be confident enough to spark and strike up conversations with those who may not believe in the existence of God at all. To them we can say, let me show you. Let me show you some reasons why. May we give a ready defense for the hope that is in us. With that, I'll turn it over to you. Any questions or thoughts or things that came to mind as we were talking about the existence of God and how we can explain that either through these crazy mathematical formulas or whether we can explain it through morals. There's a lot of other ways that we could go about this. These are the two big ones I think that are very helpful. But any other comments or questions or things that come to mind tonight? Howard, or you're raising your hand, Howard? Sorry.
Talking about like everybody knows good from evil and right from wrong, like in every society.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that part of being created in God's image, or
yeah, I believe so.
Or does that come from like Adam and Eve eating the fruit in the garden?
I think it comes from being made in God's image.
Because like before they ate the fruit, did they know right from wrong?
No, not necessarily, but they had the capability, so to speak. And so like being made in God's image, God gave them the opportunity to make a choice. And they were tempted by the knowledge of good and evil, of course. They were tempted by this idea of higher knowledge more than what they already had, deeming what they had wasn't sufficient enough. But I would say that God's morals, his moral nature, so to speak, is part of the image of God that is tainted. That's why folks today run after immorality all the time, because that image it's not gone away. It hasn't been erased, but it's been marred. It's been tainted by sin. So I think sin, when they made that choice, it fractured that image so that we are more inclined to run after immorality. Eric, you were going to say something?
To go back to just kind of tie in with the reason that God makes more sense. A lot of times I always tell people that the world, especially the school system today, will gaslight people into thinking that there's more evidence, again, that this is accidental or came from evolution, and that we don't have an example. And you did a good job pointing out that like information science, especially the DNA molecule and stuff like that, it shows that we have computers and stuff. We know that it's very much like a computer program, and we know that computers come from intelligent minds, so we have proof, and they don't. And what they do is they try to show that evolution is more the intellectual and the scientific route. But what a lot of them don't know is if you go all the way back to when Darwin came up with the concept, he built it off of two false premises. One, that the universe lasted forever, because when Darwin came up with evolution, they thought the universe was eternal. So that actually causes problems with him because he doesn't have as much time as he thought. And number two, Charles Darwin also said the reason they morph into these other things is because the cells are like blobs and they just change shape. What he didn't know was information theory. We didn't figure that out until the 50s, until we figured out all that kind of stuff. So some people believe that if Charles Darwin were around today and were giving an actual intellectual argument, he would hear these explanations and maybe even concede that his theory was wrong. But a lot of these people that push evolution as like the intellectual thing, ask them if they know that Charles Darwin built it off of the concept of an infinite universe and blobs for cells and not information science. Because then you can point out it was built off false premises, and we have evidence through computer programming. It's very similar to DNA, but there's way more evidence for it. So we always have more evidence, and don't let people gaslight you into thinking that they're the smarter ones.
Yeah. I always find it so striking that Christians are always painted as these people who are a little bit less intelligent than the intelligentsia of the day because we have faith. And again, that's sort of the point I was striving to make, is that that's actually a false equivalency. That's also a false juxtaposition. But that, like, oh, I believe in science versus faith. Actually, there's a lot of faith in the science field, as we were just trying to explain. There's a lot of faith that they have to say in order to explain their story for the way that the world is. So, yeah, good point, Eric. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, one more follow-up, too, because sometimes you run into the people. I had a friend who was a Christian but said he's a theological evolutionist. Have you ever met those before? Well, he believes in the Bible, but he also believes in evolution. And he said, well, evolution's true, and they go hand in hand because God set up the process in the beginning, and now he's letting his evolution process run. And he doesn't take the Bible literally, of course. He's amillennial, and everything's like symbolic. And he's trying to say, well, don't think the universe is really like 6,000 years old and that God really created this kind of stuff. It was all science, and this is just kind of explaining other things. And the reason you run into problems if you even take that route, let alone the science behind it, is the fact that the Bible says sin came and then death came after that. If you believe in evolution, you mean death came before sin ever came, which really contradicts the Bible in that sense. So there's all kinds of reasons why, if you run into a friend, and they usually mean well, because they want to get along with the science community, right? They'll try to say these things, point out how it just doesn't make sense. They're sitting on the fence. You either believe in evolution and don't think God did this, or you believe in God, you have to admit that it sounds crazy to the science community, but the Bible's right and they're wrong. So that's what it kind of... But you will find people that will try to take both roads and just... It's not possible because then you believe that, sin came after death, which is not.
Correct. Yeah. Good point, Eric. Any other thoughts or comments?